So, Nintendo, is it going woke? Well, it would be awfully late for it to go woke at this point, throwing itself onto the dying tail end of the beast. But this has been making the rounds around the internet a little bit. This is a hiring notice, which are looking for someone who maintains awareness of culturalization and DE&I related topics, identifying issues and proposing solutions as needed. Now that rather certainly sounds wokeified, absolutely, and there are even pages on the Japanese website that echo certain ESG sentiments, but importantly, job location, Redmond. This is, of course, a job listing for Nintendo America, which has always been very woke, and has on occasion had a little bit of influence on the main studios as well, because I mean, if you're willing to take a picture of the staff in literally going black power fists, then yeah, in all due likelihood you are going to be rather strident in your repeated demands that your political agenda be met, and indeed, they do have full-on DEI initiatives, proper full-on DEI initiatives in Nintendo of America. Now again, Nintendo of America being in the US was always going to be significantly more vulnerable to this than the rest, but I think what is interesting to notice here is the fact that Nintendo is kind of treating the entire idea of DEI and wokeism almost like a literal diversity hire, in that they'll pay lip service to it as they have previously. Nintendo underlined its commitment to diversity and inclusivity, June 2021. This has actually been going on for quite some time. I found articles from 2022, 2023, 2020, all referencing various parts of ESG nonsense that has been in Nintendo's official statements over the years. Either things like environmental, social governance, for example, where they say, oh, we're going to make our factories less polluting, or stuff like that, or moving toward energy neutrality, yabba 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 yabba. Stuff that doesn't actually mean much, if anything at all. This is the old diversity hire checkbox, where to avoid certain allegations like 10, 20 years ago, all you really needed to do was make sure that you had the correct people up front representing the company. I mean, hell, you probably remember this being an accusation levied against news corporations like literally again 20 years ago. They were checkboxing the various representative boxes on news presenters, etc. And this is kind of where we want to arrive at. As weird as that sounds, we want it to be simply just a facade. Something that is offered up as a, not sacrifice, but as a kind of ameliorating gesture. Like, oh yeah, no, we take this stuff very seriously. You know, like the Modern Slavery Act thing you see on many companies, particularly English ones, where at the bottom of their little webpage they've got a little Modern Slavery Act saying, hey, we actually think slavery is bad and we wouldn't engage in it, which you'd think would be going without saying all that much, considering they're in England, the country that literally ended the slave trade, and besides, I don't see GW necessarily engaging in that much, enforced labor. Although there was a rumor that they had a factory in China near the place with all the Uyghurs, but could never confirm that one, so let's give them the benefit of the doubt, shall we? Where this is simply just becomes kind of a legal bow and a nod to the powers that be. And we can also kind of see this from Nintendo's own production stuff. Remember the Mario movie? That had a very interesting little cultural crucible surrounding it. Various right-wing pundits have heralded the Super Mario Bros. Movie as being anti-woke. Other conservatives, however, have said the movie pushes progressive values. And you know what? That's actually kind of true. When the Mario movie was first coming out, there was an interesting kind of clash, and it was one of the first movies in which this happened. It's happening more often now, mind you, where a fair bit of people had kind of gotten entrenched into the idea of anti-wokeism and always being on the defensive and never being allowed to actually, go out and claim anything or putting forth any not antagonistic, but opposing values to the powers that be. And thus the Mario movie having Princess Peach in it, and to be fair, she did girl boss pretty goddamn hard in the movie, thus came across as very progressive and very woke. Whereas the movie in and of itself doesn't really have much of a political message at all. By and large, it's a dumb movie entertainment that primarily relies on the nostalgia of fans to drive it forward, and pretty little colors to entrance and entice the children. And you know what? That's fine. That's actually perfectly acceptable. Ideal, one might even say. Not necessarily Shakespearean, and hey, if this is all we get for another 4 or 5 years, I imagine we're all going to get rather sick of it, because, well, that's kind of... that's just sort of pseudo kind of what got us into this mess in the first place. Being an ancient person, I'm old enough to remember back in the day when the leading complaint about video games was that it wasn't adventurous enough, it wasn't taking enough chances, it wasn't being revolutionary enough. And to be fair, that was absolutely true. In an era where gaming seemed to have become stagnant, and well, let's be fair here, it still does appear to be very, very stagnant, the main complaint was that it wasn't pushing forward the way it did in the 2000s, where you had revolution upon revolution upon revolution upon revolution. Where damn near every single release seemed to be trying something different. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And if it wasn't trying something different, it was at the very least elevating the quality of the general content, Whereas today, all anyone really wants from their entertainment industry is to be entertained. And this is something that Nintendo has been consistently good at. They have simply just released Nintendo titles, as my friend-shaped item dev is so very fond of repeating to me ad infinitum. And hey, he's actually correct, that's the thing. All Nintendo really needs to do is release Nintendo products to the people who already like Nintendo. It's not difficult, and yet in the current day and age that kind of is hard, isn't it? Because the spectre of wokeism is absolutely one that is very, very real, as we have seen in so many other forms of entertainment. And so it is entirely understandable to see a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the Princess Peach beating the shit out of Mario the first time they meet, and expect it to probably be rather woke. But at the same time, we have had strong female characters, hilariously so for a very long time as well. That also isn't anything new. It's kind of the, it's going to be an interesting transition for many people to look more into media and whether or not it is actually as woke as one might expect from the current year and the general presentation of something. Very interesting recent example is the X-Men 97 show? I don't know. But basically, it's the idea of X-Men from the 90s re-released today in the style, in the presentation, and the setting of old X-Men, including the old incredibly colorful costumes, etc., and the old very campy sort of plot lines. And you know what? I expected to hate it. I expected it to be exactly the kind of woke, nonsensical garbage we've expected from virtually all entertainment up until this point, right? But it kind of isn't. It certainly doesn't really land a lot of its punches, shall we say, and it flails a little bit, and the presentation... You know how those old-style TV shows used to look kind of weird? Well, a lot of that was because we hadn't quite figured out how to do a lot of stuff yet. Whereas today, no such excuse. And so copying over the animations wonk of the show as well seems an odd choice. But the presentation of it all overall is decent enough. It's a fairly okay 90s style cartoon show, although it desperately lacks context. That is the biggest issue. They kind of just picked up from the old school X-Men and went with it, and whilst that sounds appealing, it also means that, you might have fallen off the load 20 years later. And so some of the biggest and hardest hitting plot points, like the revelation of the Goblin Queen, for example, kind of comes out of nowhere. And then I'm sitting there like, wow, that was one fuck of a plot twist. And then I start to remember by like, oh, yeah, that was a thing, like 2 decades ago. Yeah. It's a good idea, and in many ways sort of kind of pseudo-neatly delivered as well, but perhaps a few steps too far in the direction of outright nostalgia rather than more of a, I hate to say it, but modern day interpretation. Modern day as in, you know, a continuity and plot line rather than necessarily modern day delivery. Whereas Nintendo doesn't have that problem because Nintendo actually never stopped making that entertainment. So I don't actually think this is an issue at all. In all likelihood, I think this is another DE&I checkbox. I believe Nintendo of America is going to remain like this for the foreseeable future, probably forever. And so long as it has absolutely no effect on Nintendo of Japan, and they merely put on the skin suit in America, then, well, I suppose that's the cost Nintendo is going to have to pay to have an office in the United States of A. A bunch of very, very cringe people sending them weird and confusing emails on occasion. Could be worse.